behalf of the Department of Maltese, I would like to welcome Professor Mourad Yelles once again to our Faculty of Arts Library here at the University of Malta. Professor Mourad Yelles has already given actually the first talk in this series about Maltese oral traditions. This was way back in May 2016, and there he had talked about some main issues in oral traditions. Today, he'll be talking about collecting and editing oral feminine poetry in the Maghrebi context, problems and issues. Research on traditional oral literary productions poses a number of problems that can affect one's scientific work. These problems can be technical and epistemological, ideological and political. In the context of the Maghrebi poetic tradition, the repertoires of women represent a significant part of the cultural memory of this vast geographical area. In his talk, Professor Yelles will try to highlight the theoretical and practical challenges of long-term research on the ground in this area. So it is with great pleasure, as usual, to welcome Professor Yelles and to ask him to start his talk.
First of all, I'd like to apologize first for the delay, but once more, I'm, well, partly responsible of it, but not all responsibility. And second, for my English, which needs a serious brushing, but I think that thanks to the help of Adrian and you all, I'll manage to make my talk a little bit clear. It's a great pleasure for me as well to be among you, in fact. I really feel at home now. I used to say that Malta is nearly beginning to be my third homeland, the first one being Algeria, of course, the second one is being France, and the third one is Malta now. I really more and more feel like a Maltese. And I do feel like a Maltese because, especially when among you, among the scholars, among the students, among my colleagues, because I really feel that we share a lot of common problematics, a lot of common issues, especially when one deals with oral tradition. I already noticed from a long time ago that we shared many similar cultural features, that we were facing, roughly speaking, the same kind of problematics, being new countries, although very old, very ancient cultures, but new countries facing, main political, ideological issues, and among the factors that affect directly our type of research, I think that those features, the political, ideological, apart from the others that I'll deal with in a few moments, I think that we share them. I mean, I remember the first time I was in Malta, my dear friend and colleague Albert was missioning to take me from the hotel to the university, and it was my first visit in Malta, and I already have noticed some particular features concerning the Maltese language. And I remember that I was talking with Albert, and you remember we were in your car, and I said to you, well, I noticed yesterday I was listening to the TV program, and I noticed that some phonemes were pronounced in a very peculiar way. Obviously, as an Arabic speaker, I was able to recognize them, but there was something which was a little bit awkward to me, apart from the phonological problematics. And I remember you were smiling at me and you said, oh, my dear friend, you are dealing with a very serious problem. Because obviously, it was something which had to dealt with the status of language, the status of linguistic practices. And we have the same type of problem in Algeria as well, in the Maghrebi, since whereas in Malta, at least, you have national language, which is the Maltese. In Algeria, in fact, we have an official language, which is Arabic. We have now two official languages. The first one being Arabic, classical Arabic, of course. The second one being the Berber, the Tamazight. But in a very paradoxical way, the main language, the mother language, the mother tongue, in fact, has not yet been recognized officially, which is the Arabic, the Algerian Arabic, or Moroccan Arabic, or Tunisian Arabic, or whatever. So this is one of the main, one of the features we are sharing. It's the problem of the relationship we have with our memory, with our historical memory. And I experienced that in a way this type of problems would affect our field research. And I'll try to give you some examples. In fact, I'm going to divide my talk into three main parts. Obviously, when I read my translation, it's something maybe a little bit awkward, because obviously my English derives from the French. In French, it is more poetical. In English, I don't know. The spells of the object, in fact, it's les sortilèges de l'objet. Voilà. So my first point will be rather epistemological. I'll try and go into detail just in a few minutes' time. My second main point will be recording orality. So what about tradition and modernity in field research? And the same thing, I'll try and make it clear in a few minutes. Third point, transcription, restoring, standardization, main issues in a scientific project on oral tradition. So the first point will be divided into some minor parts, let's say. So my first point will be epistemological approach, and it will deal with the position of the observer, of the researcher, when it comes to define the object of research. It can be it could be strange to you to talk about the object, but in fact it's a very, very important part of the issue, because the object as it is never something given to you. We are involved in a process where little by little we construct it, in fact. Le construisons, l'objet. It's never a given, ce n'est pas un donné. And it depends largely on the point of view of the observer or the l'intervenant, l'intervenant, the person who intervenes in the field, l'intervenant, quelqu'un qui intervient sur le terrain. So
the researcher.
Yes, but
who is intervening?
Intervening,
yes.
Or interfering, both intervening and interfering in the field you are dealing with. That is to say that, in fact, we are not just people coming from outside and entering like in a house and making us like I don't know, a ghost or something, somebody who doesn't appear. In fact, we, from the very start, where we are dealing with the object, we are both elaborating it, shaping it, in fact, and inevitably we are interfering with the rest of the environment. So when I say that the object is a construction, it construit, that means that obviously you are supposed to select consciously or unconsciously. You are selecting some features which could in fact match with many things, with your personal, with your personality, which could match with your ideology, which could match with your skill, scientific skill, and so on. So and in fact, when we select features, what are we doing? We are extracting them from their context and giving them a second life. But at the same time, we are in fact giving them second significance. So, and that must be taken into account when we are dealing with our field research. So then, after extracting these elements, we are in fact elaborating them according to a certain type of representation, according to a certain shape, phantasmatic or idealized or whatever. And in fact, little by little, we are being convinced that this is the real life, this is the real object. And in fact, we lost the first feeling we had that we were intervening in a field. We lost it. By the time passing by, we lost this type of awareness or a type of fear, even fear. The first time we intervene in the field work, one must not normally have a kind of fear or kind of reticence, at least some things, some kind of of distance with the things you are supposed to discover. But by the time passing and the kind of recognition we get from the institution, from the fact that we are publishing, that we began professors, that we got a kind of legitimacy, or legitimacy in English, legitimity. So we lost this type of innocence, and it's, according to me, it's something very dangerous. It's very dangerous. To resume, in fact, the construction of the object has something to do necessarily with a certain amount of parameters which are related to the intellectual ability of the person with its affect, les affects, the type of les sentiments, the feelings, with the ideology, with the kind of political orientation you have. I'm sorry to say it, but it does intervene much more frequently than we think. And even from the scientific point of view, obviously, I'm saying things that I suppose everybody knows, at least among us. But to the extent to the scientific level is concerned, even the way the tools we are using, in fact, depends on what Michel Foucault called the episteme, which is in fact the type of general landscape of the representations a society has of itself at a certain moment of time. So the episteme gives you a certain number of tools, but obviously they are not the only one. And obviously, in the second period of time, in another episteme, the same object could be defined in another way, obviously. So we must take all these elements into account. Much more than this, when you begin to construct the object, you are concretely facing a certain number of situations where you are being part of a number of conflicts or a number of rivalries, which in fact you are not supposed to deal with, in fact. But obviously you are beginning to be used by peoples. And obviously when you intervene, when you interfere, much more than this, when you are considered as a scholar, somebody who is educated, you are being inevitably used by peoples. This one, well, I mean, at least everybody has heard or read, you remember all, I suppose, the famous pages in Claude Lévi-Strauss, La Pensée, no, Triste Tropique, the first one of these books, his first book, Triste Tropique, and this sequence is called La leçon d'écriture, des Nambiquara, when Lévi-Strauss is being used by the chief of the tribe where he's living, because this tribe needs to be supposed to have knowledge of the scripture, and obviously Lévi-Strauss suddenly realized that in fact he's been used by the chief. He was thinking that he was the one who were, I mean, dealing with the situation and mastering the situation, that in fact he realized that it is the chief of the tribe who in fact is really using it from a political point of view, obviously, to get more legitimacy, in fact. So this type of problems belong completely, according to me, to the type of issues one must deal with when he is working on field work. Another problem is when you are beginning to construct or to elaborate your object is the political dimension of this particular sequence of time. I'll give you an example. When I began my research on oral feminine poetry, I was perfectly aware that the situation of these type of repertories, of repertoire, was quite evidently minorized, with comparison with some other repertoires which were much more famous, and that this type of repertoires in fact were used by the Algerian government of that time, by the Algerian regime of that time, in order to elaborate a certain image of the national identity of Algeria. And for instance, there was a gap, a huge gap, between what we used to call in Algeria or in the Maghreb region, generally speaking, the Sana'a, which is in fact the Algerian or Maghrebi tradition, musical and poetic tradition from the Andalus, which is considered as the masterpiece among all the works, the literary works in Algeria, and on the other hand, the feminine repertoires, which are more considered. So, in fact, I realized little by little that in fact I had what Bourdieu calls des champs littéraires, the literary field, and inside these literary fields there were hierarchies between the different repertories, and by the simple fact that I was willing to make some research on oral poetry, I was considered as a fool. I mean, my status as a researcher was already minorized. So that means that very concretely, I was not able to have the same opportunities in terms of money, in terms of help from the government, than if I had chosen to work on another type of repertoire. So you see, in this particular situation, it is the role of the state as a state, or the institutions, which is in fact the problem, because the state, the institution, the officials have already planned a certain vision, a certain image of what is the objects of the national cultures, and when you decide to intervene in this type of field, you are obviously, it depends on the situation, whereas you are going to get some help or to be marginalized. Before, yes, I'm coming now to the point dealing with the feminine Haufi. So, first, I'd like to point the context, the historical context. Sorry, just I have to look. Yes, no. So, insofar as Haufi is concerned, Haufi is, in fact, so maybe rather than getting into detail, I'm going to maybe to comment just this miniature. Because according to me, it's very interesting. Why is it interesting? Not only because it's a beautiful miniature made by one of our most famous miniaturist, Algerian miniaturist, whose name is Omar Rassim, but because
How old is it?
he died. He died quite a long.
This is a recent work.
No, yeah, from a recent period. Yes, you're perfectly right. Yes, but according to the standards of the old miniatures, Persian miniatures. So why is it interesting? Because you see, at the same time, it is supposed to give you a kind of marvelous, wonderful view of a Moorish interior. Okay, so we are back centuries ago. We are not. No, you won't see any sign of colonization, any sign of French rule, nothing. We are back to a golden age, in fact. And we could have, designed or named this miniature as the golden age, where women, you see, are in their interior. One is knitting, is it? Sewing, sorry. The other one is sipping a cup of tea, and the other one is playing an instrument of music. Sorry? Embroidering, yes. Embroidering, yes, you're right, embroidering. So, what is interesting is that obviously you have at least one detail which is obviously linked with my subject, which is feminine poetry, feminine music. This young lady is playing, obviously, music and maybe singing. But, on the other hand, according to me, this miniature is in fact part of a kind of imaginary, a colonial imaginary, in fact. It's a reaction against what France was saying about the Algerian memory, about the Algerian culture. The French people used to say that we were barbars, we didn't have any civilization, that we were just, So this is the response. This is the response of an artist, an Algerian artist. But at the same time, it's completely unreal. We are in the making of a memory, in fact. Because this is not tradition. This is not tradition. I'm sorry to say it. It's I mean, an idealized way of looking at tradition. But we needed it at that time. I mean, we as a people, the Algerian people, we needed this type of imaginary scene. So we can translate. I mean, I'm translating the main issues of this type of representation into my my talk. In fact, I'm translating because I see that this type of miniatures of artistic work, in a way, comforted our memory, our national memory, but at the same time, in a way, cela biaisé. It introduced a bias in it. So, and why is it interesting to me? Because, in fact, when I began my research, I was something like nearly 21 years old by that time. When I used to look to these miniatures, I was completely addicted to it, in fact. I believed in it. I was believing that tradition was this. And it took me so long to realize that it was completely false. I mean, it was completely false. This is not tradition. But I was thinking that this was tradition. See? So, looking back to, okay. So, I'm coming back now to the, because one of these women could well have sung a piece of the tradition I'm working on, which is the Haufi. So, but now I come to some historical documents. Now, you see this woman. She's in fact it's just a small part of the photo on the right. This woman was called Sheikha Titma, and she used to be a very great singer, singer and musician. And she was very famous because precisely she used to sing and to interpret the pieces of my repertoire, of the Haufi. She was very, very well known for her interpretation of Haufi. But she was not the only one, and in fact, we had... Sorry.
The instrument is not Algerian,
No, it's a violin.
She's using
it's a violin.
but
A violin. Yes, but the Oriental way of playing the violin. Yeah. Pardon? Non. C'est l'alto, oui, je pense que c'est l'alto, absolument, c'est l'alto, yes. This instrument, in fact, this one is a tar, and this one, in fact, is a quitra, which is a kind of ancient, old tradition. But, in fact, although this repertoire is supposed to be only women repertoire, obviously the men know this repertoire as well, and some of them can even sing it, like this great master. He's a great master. His name was Sheikh Abdikrim Deli, and this instrument you see is called the rebab. This is very old, and he used to sing Haufi as well, surprisingly enough, although he was a man. And he used to sing it in a very, very subtle way. But he was not the only one. This is another master, a great master. Maybe it's the great master, even maybe much more famous than Sheikh Deli Abdikrim Deli. His name is Sheikh Al-Arbi Ben Sari, and he's playing rebab as well. And he used to sing as well the Haufi. See. So, that's my book, in fact. It's just a hint. I would just, yes, no, just because, yes.
Can I ask, so it wouldn't be regarded as offensive offensive or unbecoming in any way
For a man
for
to...
a man to...
No, not at all.
And the women would not take offense?
No, not at all. Not at all. Not at all.
Okay.
Not at all.
Would you be singing about sort of feminine themes somehow?
Yes, one of the themes. I'm going to add some features. The first one is that in fact this repertoire is anonymous. You never get any name of a woman. Completely, totally anonymous. The second feature is that it is composed in Maghrebian or Algerian Arabic, but this is for the Arabic, the citadine Arabic, the first, from the first wave, l'Arabe citadin, which has many similarities with the Andalusian Arabic, in fact. So
pre-Hillelian?
Yes, pre-Hillelian, totally pre-Hillelian, yes, totally pre-Hillelian. And another feature is that it is closely linked with some rituals or practices, women practices, for instance, dealing with babies, or even or rituals, religious rituals, for instance, going to the saints, visiting the saints, even for during the spring. Going with the family, the rest of the family, and playing with the cousins and the rest of the members of the family, and the women used to sing it with they used to play the swing, the escarpolette. They used to play swing while they were singing the verses, les versets. Maybe c'est F3. Okay, I can give you an example of this. That's for some kind. Alors, the problem is that, in fact, when I'm sorry, I'm supposed to talk about my experience, so I'm going to say, as we say in Arabic, أعوذ بالله من كلمة أنا. I'm going to speak about myself, but obviously I'm taking myself as a kind of proof. When I began, in fact, I realized that there was practically no work on this field. And much more than this, in fact, the type of procedure I was willing to practice was already not viewed as something interesting by the institution, because I had my degree in literature, okay, in comparative literature, and nearly all my friends had already chosen some subjects on literature. I mean, I don't know, comparison between Balzac and or Flaubert or Zola and an Algerian writer. Anyway, so when I asked for a supervisor and I tell him, well, I want to work on feminine poetry, there was nobody. I couldn't find nobody able to take me as a student. And in fact, this situation led me to go to Great Britain, where I spent 2 years, in fact, in SOS. But the same problem occurred because in fact, even in SOS, when I exposed my subject to the only person who was supposed to supervise me, Professor Norris, who's somebody quite well known. He made a lot of works on Mauritania, in fact. And by that time he was a young professor, just coming to the institution, and he had not the legitimacy to impose a certain number of things about my subject. So I was compelled to take a number of exams, among them some exam in classical Arabic poetry, which had nothing to do at all with my subject. So I entered into a kind of conflict with the administration of SOS, and unfortunately my supervisor by that time was not able to help me in any way. He tried, but he had not, le poids. It was not sufficient. The authority, yes, exactly. He had not the authority to impose his point of view and my point of view. So I decided to leave London and to go back to France, in fact. And fortunately enough, I met Professor David Cohen, who accepted my subject, and I worked with him. It was a wonderful man, really, in all type of aspects. But in Algeria itself, in Algiers by that time, there was one institution who could have been able to help me. And this institution was called the CRAP. By that time, it was the CRAP, the Center for Research in Anthropology, Prehistoire, and Ethnography. But that time, this center was more interested in the Berber part of the cultural heritage. So, although they were quite sympathetic with me, in fact, I didn't find my place among them. But, on the other hand, I was brought up in a family where my father, especially my father, who is a musician and a musicologist as well. So I was brought up in a family where very young I was, I realized that it was very important for somebody from my generation to work on this type of field because we needed it. We needed it because for so long we have been deprived of our memory. So my generation had a kind of obligation to do this. I really felt like being obliged. Apart from the things that I really appreciated this type of poetic productions.
Just one short question. Yeah. What was causing that preference, that institutional preference in Berber heritage as
in fact, yes, your question is really keen. Because the director by that time was Moulud Mamri. And Moulud Mamri was, in fact, both a writer, a very well-known writer, and Moulud Mamri. And he was considered as a symbol of the struggle for the Amazigh civilization and struggle from. So he was a very kind person. I met him several times and he was very, very interested by my works, but obviously he had priority and I didn't belong to his priorities, so that's it. So, so another factor is the way I was brought up, and it was very important for me because by the time I chose this type of research, it was for me a kind of a way of recovering what was called by that time the personality, la personnalité algérienne, and to try and re-establish a sort of national identity. And for me, so in fact, at first I was willing to work on tales, les contes. But my father, I had a discussion with my father, and he told me, well, you know, the tales are quite, well, there's already quite a lot of works on tales, popular tales. Whereas, in fact, there's nothing on the feminine poetry. And little by little, I came to the conclusion that since I was willing to work on national memory, what would be more interesting than feminine memory? Because obviously it was a stereotype, but I'm trying to make kind of archaeology of myself. So by that time I was really still dealing with a lot of stereotypes, and among those stereotypes there was this idea that in a society, especially traditional society, the women were more conservative than men. So in a way, working on feminine memory would take me directly to the heart of my subject and my project. So c'était un raccourci for me. So it would be much more practical for me to work on feminine memory than men's memory, which could be maybe more complicated or maybe biased, busy. So it was for me a sort of strategic choice, un choix stratégique. Et donc, but obviously there was as well a lot of romanticism in my way of looking at things. Obviously, c'est très romantique. J'ai parlé tout à l'heure. I was talking about it when we saw this picture. And there was as well, I must tell you as well that my father, in his young days, belonged to the Communist Party in Algeria, so during the colonial period. And obviously, for me, working on this type of productions was a way of dealing with the productions of the dominated, la production des dominés. So taking into account the production of the people, those people who have been marginalized by history, which has never been considered. And in fact, another point which is important is the fact that by that time, and unfortunately for me, it's still a big problem when, especially in Algeria. By that time, I would consider that one should deal with this type of repertories because there was the danger of losing them. I was completely inhabited by this stereotype of the lost, la perte, the problem of the lost. We are losing things. Oh my God, it's terrible. We must do all we can to grab things before everything is going out of control. And it took me such longer time to realize that in fact a society never lose or gain anything. It's just evolution. And I mean, I'll take a metaphor. One of my daughter is dealing with the problematic of the ruins, of photographing, you know, shooting ruins and the state of the ruin, la ruine. And we have a lot of discussion with her. I had a lot of discussion with my daughter because she used to think exactly the same way as I did a long time ago. She told me, you know, it's terrible because when you see a wonderful palace and this palace is falling into pieces, you can't be just, you know, neutral. It's horrible. A wonderful palace falling into pieces, you must react. You must try and, you know, rebuild it or and it took me a long time, and I'm not quite sure that she's convinced even now, to tell me, you know, look, from the beginning of humanity, man has always just recycling things. Civilization is only recycling. It's nothing more, after all. Civilization is recycling things. But one thing important is that you never hear this type of sentence in the mouth of somebody from the institution, because the society, as it works, and the institutions as they work, need something which is called identity, I don't know, personality, purity, authenticity. They need it. And obviously, because it's the cement of a society, it's the cement of a regime, it's the cement of domination. To dominate, I mean, look at what somebody like Hitler did when he was at the power. I mean, you know, burning books, and, you know, Goebbels did this. I mean, so the institutions and the society needs a kind of order. But and when you talk about order, you obviously talk about something which never change, which never change. It's always the same thing. Malta has always been Malta. Algeria has always been Algeria. It's multi-secular. And it's incredible because the people never realize that, you know, we're just recycling things. We are ourselves, we are nothing than just, you know, some atoms, les atomes, des atomes recycled. And so it's exactly the same thing for culture. Culture is just recycling. Bricolage as well, as Lévi-Strauss put it, bricoler les choses. We're just recycling things. So when now even in Algeria, it's very frequent. Somebody come to me and tell me, Mr. Yelles, it's awful. It's happening in some part of Algeria. We are losing things. We are losing, I don't know, some large parts of our memory. It's very difficult for me to make it understand that it's the law of. C'est la loi de la nature. C'est la loi. Society works like that, and you must take it into account. So, what I call the syndrome de la perte. Le syndrome de la peste, pas de la peste. Le syndrome de la perte. It's something which is very, very hard to get rid of, and especially because it has something to do with the making of what we call in French le récit national. So the national narrative. National narrative. Insofar as we are dealing with national in fact, with the dynamic of a society, with a dynamic of the cultural heritage, I think inevitably we'll face this problem. The second point, so now I'll go a little quicker. It's the problem of the relationship between tradition and modernity, and in fact, tradition is something very, very, very complicated to deal with when you are working on the field work, because most of the time you'll hear this discourse that in fact this part of a tradition of a poetical production belong to the tradition. But when you ask people what is tradition, what do you mean by tradition, after all? Well, tradition is tradition. It's like the air we are breathing. No. In fact, it's just something which is completely very hard to define, which give people confidence, and maybe it's one of its main reasons to exist. When something tradition, oh yes, tradition, great. But what is tradition? In fact, and here I got two quotations, unfortunately, in French. I'll try to resume them. One is from one of my favorite authors dealing with oral poetry. It's Paul Zumthor. Maybe some of you have heard of him. He's a French researcher. He first dealt with the medieval poetry in France. And then he came he enlarged his scope, and he wrote a book on orality and oral tradition. And he says, Paul Zumthor says, la tradition. Maybe I'll give it in French first, and I'll resume it, sum it. La tradition donc est un texte virtuel et continu sur lequel se détachent des textes concrets. Nous n'avons et je saute le texte. So the text we are dealing with in a practical way. Le texte n'est qu'une partie des possibilités offertes par la tradition. In fact, we are just a piece of what we think is tradition is in fact just a piece of a process, of a real process. So it just like if you take a glass of water from a river and you say this glass is tradition. In fact, the water who's flowing in the river is never the same, but for us it's the same. It's a river and it's something which doesn't change. And the second quotation is from somebody who did a wonderful work about the tradition, the notion of tradition in the music, in the Oriental music. His name is Jean During, and he wrote le plus gênant dans l'usage du terme tradition est sa valorisation implicite ou explicite. The way we take the term of tradition and we use it in a positive or most of the time positive way. Jusqu'à ces derniers temps, pour les historiens et les ethnomusicologues, les productions artistiques valables étaient celles qui précédaient les influences de la modernité sur les arts ethniques. Most of the time, we consider that what is authentic is something which has never been touched by modernity. So this is has been kept as itself. Il considérait les récentes productions, the production which has been produced just recently, artistiques, comme de simples reflets dégénérés d'une gloire passée, comme des concoctions bâtardes dénuées d'authenticité. So, you see, we found this concept of authenticity. Tradition is something authentic. But what is authentic? According to what criterion you can define authenticity? La traditionnalité, érigée en critère de qualité, est devenue synonyme d'authenticité. Traditional is equal to authenticity. Substantif au contour discutable qui, dans l'esprit des utilisateurs, va souvent de pair avec une certaine idée du contexte. So, what is authenticity? What is tradition according to a lot of people? It's oralité de la transmission, so transmitted according to orality. Fonctionnalité, the work has a function, social function. Spontanéité, it's something which bursts out like a flower, you know, it's something which is given from God or from, I don't know, we don't know who. Anonymat, so a production which is anonymous, ainsi qu'avec certains traits esthétiques tels que la simplicité, simplicity, sans exclure une certaine sophistication du système. Donc la répétitivité, the fact that what is authentic, what is tradition, must be something which is repeated in the same pattern, etc., etc. You see, so obviously we have a lot of stereotype, which are related to tradition. So now, so that is for tradition. As for, according to me, when you are dealing with concretely with the research field, you are going to be facing at least three types of trials. I choose this term in English. I don't know whether it's very pertinent or not. I hesitated between trial and test. L'épreuve in French is épreuve, une épreuve, prova in Italian. Even in musical terms, prova de orchestra, which is une répétition as well. So, première épreuve, first trial is the field, l'épreuve du terrain. So, how is it possible to define the field? Is it just an opportunity for the researchers? Is it a projection of the self of the researcher? How the field is little by little constructed, elaborated through the interaction between several parts or different intervenants. So the field is, as I said just before, a construction, and this for us leads to the question of the status of les informateurs, les informatrices, the people who are going to give you, the information. What do they keep to themselves? To what extent are they lying? Are we supposed to consider that, in fact, they're really lying? Or just are they just in the way trying to reconsider, according to their standards, the way they look at traditions? So, you see, it's a very complex situation where you as well have a part in it. How the research field is in fact a kind of virtual space. C'est un espace virtuel where several factors, several powers interferes the economic power, just for instance, just money. I mean, it's very easy for us to speak about science, about publishing, about the beauty of art. But when you come to reality, I mean, you're dealing with people. From time to time, you are going to feel that they are waiting for some kind of, of help, financial help or something. I won't say that they are buying things, no, because even themselves, they consider that those things are precious. But in a way, they know that you're coming from the capital town, that you have a status. They are, in the daily life, they are facing very harsh situation. So, in a way, I'm not saying that they consider that you are exploiting them, but in a way, not far from this, you see. So the economic play its part, the political plays its part, and so far. So second, l'épreuve de la collecte, the collection, la collecte. What's the English, by the way, for collect? Collecting or collection?
Collection.
Collection. La collecte. Le fait de collecter, to collect things, to gather things, to gather information, to gather how. Yes. I don't know. In French, it's la collecte. Collecter.
The verbal noun. So.
Yes, la collecte. Collecter.
Collection or collecting?
I think.
La collecte. Both collection and okay, collecting. Well, I had some hesitation, so I chose collection. But it's somewhat awkward to me, a collection, la collection, because in French it's something else, collection, c'est autre chose. So, what are we gathering? What are we collecting? Do you realize really that we are supposed to collect something very precise? For instance, in my case, I realized very rapidly that the women I was dealing with, in fact, they would give me several times, many times, in fact, something which they called healthy, which was not in fact healthy, or which belonged to a kind of repertory very similar to healthy but not healthy. So this is also as well a problem when you work, because you don't know, you don't expect in fact to find really what you are willing to find in fact, and you must be very humble and recognize that in fact you are not aware of the way the people you are working on themselves, they combine things. You are not really aware of the combination, in fact. You intervene, you know, there's a metaphor in French. We say like an elephant in a magasin de porcelaine, where you have a very precious thing, like an elephant entering you. So you break everything, and you think, sorry?
In English, it's a bull in a china shop.
Exactly. So you don't realize really. It's a very, very, and much more dangerous than this. In fact, you suppose that the collection you made is representative of the whole repertory, which is completely false. I mean, you read. At first I worked on something like 450 pieces of poetry. Now I reached maybe nearly 1,000. So it was completely crazy for me. It was completely crazy. So you are not, you haven't got the right, according to me, to extrapolate. On peut pas extrapoler. You must realize that it's just a small part of a puzzle, and you are not able. One person can't handle the whole puzzle, or at least find the rationality, la rationalité du puzzle. You can't handle it, at least when you are at the first beginning of your work. Much more than this, even the concept we are using concepts that most of the time that don't fit the reality of the field research, the field work. For instance, when I say poetry, what is poetry? I mean, according to what standard are you going to define poetry? Is there any kind of poetry in proverbs? Poetry. If it's the case, what's the difference between the poetry involved in poem, in proverbs, and the poetry involved in a song? for instance. So you must reconsider all the categories you have inherited from your scholars, the day you were at the university. La littérarité, la poéticité, what is a verse, what is a rhyme, and all that. Even the name of the repertories, I mean, it's completely bizarre to see that in some books or some works, you see that they consider that, for instance, that the difference between, let's say, le conte merveilleux, the fairy tales, and le conte drôlatique, what in French is drôlatique, the tale, the funny tale, the tale which makes le drôlatique, the tale which is supposed to make you laugh, drôlatique. But in fact, in many occasions, you will find that what is fairy tale, it's fairy, can even make you laugh. So you see, it's very complicated. So I came to this, the last point, the fourth point, the translation, l'interprétation. How are we going to interpret what we gathered, what we collected? And much more than this, in fact, I often say to my students that at this stage, we are exactly in the same position as somebody who was a musician who has wrote a partition of music. He's going to interpret it. And much more than this, he's supposed to say that this partition is representative of a whole tradition, musical tradition, which is completely false. So we are just interpreters. We are interpreting in our way a partition which we have written ourselves, believing that it was the exact reflect of the reality, which is not. So you see, there's a kind of strat, many stratus in these problems. So, so we are we must be very humble. Well, it's all right. So because it's already nearly time. So the third point is, maybe I'll emphasize, I must be much more practical. The first one, the structure and the event. It's a hint at a wonderful book written by Catherine Clément, who is a philosopher, French philosopher, and she was a student of Lévi-Strauss. And she wrote a book on Lévi-Strauss. And one of the chapters she wrote is called La structure et l'événement. And in fact, she's dealing with a trial, who's made often against Lévi-Strauss, saying that Lévi-Strauss was the master of the structuralist school. And the structuralists were accused to deny the history, the historical dimension of the process of the societies. And so there was a kind of contradiction between the way the structuralist school and Lévi-Strauss was able to elaborate, starting from the social reality, to elaborate, to extract a structure which was supposed to be significant in relation with the reality, and on the other hand, the thing which was not predictable, the thing which occurred, the thing which is going to destabilize the structure, c'est l'événement. L'événement interfère avec la structure. And for us, what is, in fact, what I'm trying to emphasize is the problem of variation. What do we do with the problem of variation, which means that are we in a position to state or to poser, to state that there is a model, and according to this model, we have many types of variation. And if we do so, what is the original pattern? What is the original model we are going to choose as a model? And I do feel now that we have a gigantic responsibility. For instance, when I published my book, I used to say to say this type of anecdote to my students. I published my books. It took me 10 years to publish my books, because when I passed my degree, my MPhil degree, my thesis, I was quite convinced that there was going to be research, and so the time passing by, well, I put my manuscript aside. And after 10 years, I realized that, in fact, nobody had still written on my subject. And when it was published, it was, well, très modestement, very modest, in a very modest way, it was a kind of little event in this kind of field, because there was so little publications on women poetry that, obviously, as we say in French, au pays des aveugles, les bandes sont rois. When you know, in the country where everybody is blind, le borgne en anglais, the man who has just one eye.
The one-eyed man.
The one-eyed man. Okay, in French it's le borgne. The one-eyed man is the king, obviously, because he has one eye. Everybody is blind, so obviously it was my case. But there was a very curious thing which happens. It's the fact that my book became a reference, which I had never predicted this type of situation, and people came to the fact that they quoted me as if I was giving them the model of the type of poetry. For instance, this is the poem, the piece of poetry which was published in the book of Mr. Yelles. So this is the pattern, the model. The other ones are just variation, which was not my ambition. In fact, it's not. In fact, when I was dealing with 10, 11, 12 different or slight variation from a pattern, I was asking myself, obviously I was trying to find criteria. And one of the criteria, obviously, was the coherence of the poem, obviously. Because this type of poetry is very subtle. Each rhyme, each verse is an entity in itself. It has a meaning, a complete meaning in itself. So it's exactly like a puzzle. You can take one verse from one poem and put it in another poem, and it will work. And you have a kind of new poem. You see, so you can imagine the millions of possibilities of variation. So I was really puzzled first, because I said to myself, what I'm going to do? Which one is the good one? Which one is the right one? Which one is the authentic one? At that time, I was still thinking in terms of authenticity. And obviously, I choose according to my knowledge, to what it seemed to me that, according to the rhyme, if the rhyme was right, if the rhythm was quite coherent. But it's just a tricky way of doing things. I mean, I was just c'était du bricolage, according to me. I hadn't by that time. I had no, theoretical apparatus to handle it. I would just bricoling. I would just But nevertheless, once my book was published, I was considered as a reference, and the way I was putting the things appeared to my lecturers, to my readers, that it was the right way of the right model. See, so it is very, 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 very dangerous. So I realized little by little that in fact tradition was only la déformation. It was just always kind of deformation, and in fact the shape of the object is always moving, changing, and you never have a model, a real model, in fact. And in fact, the real rule is variation. It's not the structure; it's the variation. And all the poets in oral tradition, they spend most of their time playing with variation. And if for us it's a defect, c'est un défaut, because we don't feel secure when we have so many variations. For them, it's reality, it's real tradition. Tradition is variation, which is completely different from the point of view we have as scholars, and even from the point of view of many people, at least in my society. For instance, another big problem is how to render rhythm and how to render metaphor in two different cultural contexts. It's something which is very, very difficult, because even for the metaphor can change from one poem, just one word. One word with one word you can split from one metaphor to the other, and you can change completely the meaning of the poem, for instance. So how is it possible to translate in a way, or to interpret in a way, those issues? And for instance, just one detail, the title. Well, in my context, I was very surprised, because several times some of my colleagues would give a title to the poem, a title which was completely created by them. Yes, in a way it's very comfortable for us, because we are used to read a piece of poetry with a title. But it's not the case in many, many oral traditions. At least in the Maghrebi tradition, a poem doesn't have a title. Or it has a title, it's the first verse. And that's all. And it's sufficient. It's enough. So when you give a title, in a way you're handling, you're changing, you're already giving, a kind of bias to the lecture you are going to deal with. Not to say about the translation into another language. For instance, when you translate the Algerian Arabic to the French, for instance, well, it was I read some translation which was completely terrible. I mean, especially this poetry is so subtle, so it's like miniature, you see. And when you come with your French dictionary and you enter the it's like if you with a hammer you're breaking everything. I mean, it's terrible. On other things. Yes, I forgot about the rhythm and metaphor. Rhythm is body. What do we do with the body of the oral tradition? Because we are dealing with a kind of production, cultural production, when the body is involved in many ways. Obviously, through the rhythm. It's the cadenza, la cadence. And you are not reading things; you are hearing things. Don't forget that we are dealing with something which is said, which is sung, and with people we are receiving it through their ears. We are not in a silent lecture reading, like non, c'est pas de la lecture silencieuse. C'est la performance. We are dealing with performance. first. And secondly, a lot of those traditional poetry is linked with rituals. So the body, you know, especially the women body, they're, you know, they're praying, they're dancing, they're swinging. And what do we do with this? How are we going to translate it when we collect things? All these aspects should, unfortunately, may be put it aside or completely forgotten. It won't appear in your work, in your academic work, or practically not. Obviously, you can take pictures, you can, you know, il y a des annexes, you could, but it's not the same as, you know, trying to render the importance of the body. We are talking about, you know, a production where body is very, very important. And last but not least, the voice and the music. For instance, it took me a long time to realize that, in fact, if I wanted to have some clues about the rhythm, I should be obliged to take into account the music, you know, the melodies, the way, and even l'amplitude in French, l'amplitude, you know, the balance of the swing, because, you know, obviously, because according to the balance of the swing, you have the rhythm of the verse. You know, it must take, yes, yes, of the swing. It must take, you know, the same length, roughly speaking. You see, so there's a link between the practice, the playing the swing, and the length of the verse and the melody, the tune.
So they would sing one verse going up.
Yeah. For instance, yes. See, so. You must take it into account. So the rhythm and the melody, and for instance, I noticed when I was first trying to find the roots of this genre. Obviously, the roots of this genre are very, very old, very ancient. According to me, they came from the Berbers tradition, obviously, and after that there was several lays. And obviously the most recent one and the most prominent one was the Andalusian influence. But in fact, when you listen to the melody, it sounds very similar to some Berber women's songs. We call them the ashwiq in Berber, and in fact, it could be the proof, proof that, you know, what the text is no more able to give us evidence of the age of the poems. We are going to get it maybe through the music. La musique est plus conservative que les textes. Les textes varient, la musique non. La musique est beaucoup plus conservative. Elle conserve plus. And then we have finally the socio-anthropological issues, and obviously, for instance, when I say socio-anthropological issues, it has to deal with the status of culture, of popular culture in our countries. How does popular culture appear nowadays? In our context, particular context, as Maltese or Algerian people. Does the society gives these rituals a consideration or not? Or what is going to happen through the, you know, globalization, through the way the youngsters among our society are going to deal with these memories, cultural memory? And apart from this, what the institutions are able or willing to do with this type of situation. Just a final example. I was talking about the body, the women body, and we know that, especially in our societies, in the Maghrebi societies, the Muslim societies, it's a big issue, as you all know, obviously. And for instance, the way the women used in the old days to sing or to practice the Hawfi as a traditional ritual when they were visiting saints. Nowadays, it's beginning to be very more difficult for them. Why? Because obviously we have this wave of, Wahhabite ideology, which considers that, women going to visit saints, it's prohibited. Women's dancing, it's prohibited. See, so what are our institutions, our government going to do with this? And we see, for instance, in Algeria that we have, different phases, different stage. From time to time, it seems that the regime or the government is willing to try and give this heritage with what is considered to be prohibited or not, its legitimate place. And from time to time, it seems that we are we are going backward. You see, because the government or the institutions are afraid of what can happen if we don't know what. So you see how a kind of a scientific object, I was speaking about from the beginning of this talk, you see how a very small object, which is a wonderful, very old piece of poetry, can be the hostage of political and ideological conflicts, you see. But hopefully we must try and go on with our work, because it's a wonderful and very necessary work we are doing. And obviously, I do feel that you are in the same situation in Malta. According to what I heard and what I said and what I read, I had the great honor and chance to meet several years ago the Professor Casar-Policino and Professor Mifsud, and well, I realized that they were struggling in order to make those productions their place in the Maltese landscape, cultural landscape, and I think it's something which is very, very important. Thank you very much for your listening.